Hello. We are meeting today Lori Gottlieb, who is a famous writer and a famous therapist. And this is an interview for the well-known Literature Festival, which happens every summer when we invite bestseller authors and the authors of our publishing house to talk about their writings and about their books. And Lori Gottlieb has come today here in the online to talk to us about her activity as a therapist, about her books, mainly about maybe you should talk to someone like I am doing now, and about her podcast, which is a very interesting one called Dear Therapists, plural, attention. So it's like a cry of help to all the therapists out there. Hello, Lori. Thank you so much for having accepted our invitation.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
It's so nice to talk to a therapist and not to be in therapy for a change.
Yes. Although you never know what might happen in this conversation.
Indeed. So, when I knew that I was to interview you, I thought about In Treatment. I think you know the series. And actually, there's another series coming out following your book with Eva Longoria. How do you feel about this? Can you tell me more about it? And let's start from there, just to not to get to the point immediately. The point being the therapy and the therapist.
Right. So we are making a TV series from the book. We have not casted it yet. And I think this is very different from In Treatment, because in Maybe You Should Talk to Someone, you really, there's so much humor in the human condition, and we all happen to be therapists and you're going to therapy or being in therapy, but it's really just about people going through life and what happens when we get in our own ways, what happens when we can't see our blind spots, what happens when there's this big gap between what we want and what we do. And, I think that what we find is that we're all more the same than we are different. And so I'm really excited to show therapy from this just more normalized human level than I think other media have.
It's so interesting that you say that, for you to say that, because a therapist is not God. He or she is not someone who has all the answers. And we kind of forget this, that the therapist also needs therapy. And it's an act of moral hygiene to have a therapist when you are a therapist. How does this happen? That's very interesting, how a therapist confesses to another therapist. What's the process?
So first of all, I say at the beginning of Maybe You Should Talk to Someone that my greatest credential is that I'm a card-carrying member of the human race. And that's why I showed my therapy sessions with my therapist, as well as following the lives of the 4 other people who come to me for therapy. I didn't want to be the expert up on high, because I really felt it was important to just show our shared humanity. So, why do therapists go to therapy? For the same reason that everybody else goes to therapy. I think when you're a therapist, there is that other layer, as you said, that we want to make sure that we understand ourselves as well as we can, so that we can be more helpful to the people who come to us. And I think that it would be almost impossible to be a good therapist if you haven't done the work on yourself first.
Which is quite reassuring, because therapists are in control then. At least this. If they can't fix you, they can't just mess up with you, hopefully. So,
well, I think what we're trying to do as therapists is we're really trying to hold up a mirror to somebody and help them to see themselves in a way that maybe they haven't been willing or able to see. And if we haven't had that own mirror held up to us by our therapist, then all kinds of things might get lost. We might not be as effective. And in fact, you're right, we could be destructive. So it's not that therapists have it all figured out. It's that they're actively aware of what's going on with themselves, so that it doesn't bleed into the therapy room.
One of the most interesting parts of your book seemed to me to be the fact that we keep on telling lies. not intentionally always, to ourselves mainly and to the others. How can a therapist fix this? Is it something very important to always tell the truth to yourself mainly? Because what's important in your work is the fact that you think that changing your story can change your life, can change your vision, and can change your perspective. And that's the gist of it. If you want to become a better person, or if you want to become your best potential, as it is so often said.
Right. So I talk also, I did a TED talk about this, and this is really the crux of maybe you should talk to someone too, is this idea that we're all unreliable narrators, that we are not intentionally misleading. It's that we're seeing a situation and we're seeing the world and we're seeing our lives and we're seeing other people through our particular subjective lens. And there's so much more to the story. Often when I see couples in therapy, you'll hear somebody tell a version of a story and the other person was there in that same interaction and they have a completely different version of the same story. And both are true and both are untrue. Mm-hmm. They're both true because that is the person's experience, but they're both untrue because they're not allowing for the full story to emerge. Mm-hmm. And the true story is the full story with all the different perspectives. And so I think that it's really important when someone comes to therapy to be able to help them to look at, what are the parts of the story that are missing? Is the protagonist moving forward? Is the protagonist going in circles? What parts of the story are being maximized and kind of, told more of? And what are the parts that are being minimized because the person feels shame or they don't want to talk about their responsibility or their role in what isn't going well? But I think story is so important in another way, which is that we all have stories about our lives that were told to us through our experiences, through the people who raised us, through the culture, and we carry them into adulthood, and your story might be something like, I'm unlovable, or I can't trust anyone, or nothing will ever work out for me. Or it could be a different story like, I'm better than everyone else, right? These are all distortions. And so I think part of the work of therapy is to really figure out what is the faulty narrative and how can we make it more accurate? So you don't have to carry around these inaccurate narratives that you've been carrying around for a very long time. And that will help you navigate through the world more smoothly.
Mm-hmm. But how do you do this? For instance, if somebody doesn't believe that her story is not the right one or the accurate one, as you said, how do you convince somebody to change her story? Is it possible? Because sometimes this is a form of protection. We all have armors and masks, pandemics aside. So we're not willing to give up our story. First of all, because it's familiar. It's the devil we know. So yeah.
That is the problem with change. As part of being able to change your story is being able to change. And the reason that change is so hard, even positive change. I mean, look at New Year's resolutions. Why do they not work? Because you're right, we tend to cling to the familiar, even if the familiar made us unhappy, even if the familiar is difficult, even if the familiar is you're in a bad relationship, you're in a bad job, you keep doing the same thing over and over. That feels familiar to you. And there's something comforting about the familiar. And so, and if you do something different, you have to go into a place of uncertainty. You don't know what it's like doing something different. It's almost like you're being plopped into this foreign land. You don't know the directions. You don't know the language. You don't know the culture. You don't know anybody there. And you're saying, okay, go there. It'll be better. And it probably will be, but it feels really uncomfortable because you aren't acclimated yet. And so I think that it's important for people to help them look at why they're having trouble changing. And part of it too is that there are steps to changing. There are these different stages, and I write about them as well. And it's not just like you make a decision and then you make the change and it happens. That's why these changes don't stick. So there's pre-contemplation where you don't even know you're thinking about making a change. There's contemplation where you're thinking about it, but you're not ready to do it yet. There's preparation where you're doing the research, you're thinking about how will I leave this relationship, or how will I change jobs, or how will I move to this city, whatever it is. And then there's action, where you take action and you make the change. And that's not the last step. The last and most important step is maintenance. How do you maintain the change? And so people don't realize that built into maintenance is that you will slip back. So you will call that person that you said you weren't going to call. You will, eat too much. You will drink too much, whatever the thing is. You will not exercise. But you have to have self-compassion. You have to say, that's what happened today. And tomorrow I'm going to get back on track. And the more self-compassion you have, the fewer times you're going to slip back, and the more you will maintain the change until it becomes your new normal and it doesn't feel foreign anymore. Now it feels like, oh, that's familiar, that's comfortable, I like it here.
So tomorrow is another day for that huge effort it takes if you want to change a little bit of yourself. Is that true that it takes 21 days to create a new habit or to get rid of a bad one? Or is it just a legend?
There's all kinds of science about how long it takes to change. But again, where are you in those stages of change? And how motivated are you and how ready? I think readiness is something that is often overlooked. People might say they want to change, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they are ready to change. So then we have to look at what is the hesitance, what is the resistance to changing. And once you get to that, the change becomes much easier, but you can't really do it if a part of you is really fighting the change.
Mm-hmm. So what are the main engines of change? And since you wrote a second book, which is translated by Litera as well, Marry Me, is that love? Is love the best thing in order to change someone? Just give that person love, or the hope of love, or the possibility of love, and then she will do whatever it takes to change, to lose weight, to act better, to, I don't know, change the life, change even the ideal of a perfect man, which doesn't exist, but let's keep that between us.
Well, I think there is a perfect man for you, right? So I think that when we talk about what I was talking about in Marry Him, it was not about lowering your standards. It was about raising your standards. Mm-hmm. Make sure that you are looking for the things that actually lead to happy, lasting relationships and marriages. The character qualities, generosity, emotional generosity, kindness, emotional stability, reliability. And of course, you want all the other things. You want chemistry, you want passion, that of course, but you also need these other things. You can't change another person. So when people talk about how do you change someone, you don't change someone else. You change your response to someone else. So if someone is doing something that is not working for you, can you set a boundary? Can you talk to them about it? But what are you going to do differently? If you say, I don't like it when you talk to me that way, next time you talk to me that way, I'm going to go take a walk, or I'm going to whatever, or maybe I don't want to be in this relationship if you continue to talk to me that way. The boundary is not making the other person change. The boundary is, what are you going to change if this is not working out for you in the way you need it to?
But is it worth it to change yourself? Because from what you say, it means, to me at least, that you have to change yourself and you have to always be ready to pay the price. So if I warn you, do not talk to me like this ever again, and you do, I have to assume the consequences that you are not willing to assume yourself. So I might walk away, but it hurts me because it's the relationship that I dreamed of, or maybe I like some other things about you, but then I have to stand by my point of view, at least, or by my vision, that I can't put up with this anymore. So is it worth it?
Well, that's only you can decide if it's worth it. So if you decide that there are so many great things about this relationship, but this person sometimes talks to me this way, and that works for me, that works for you. But if it doesn't work for you, and it might not, because nobody likes to be talked to that way, you may decide, you know what, this is not something that I want. And that's a boundary that you set with yourself. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the really important thing for people to understand. You can't change another person, but you can influence another person. Mm-hmm. So if you do something different, like when you talk to me that way, I'm not going to engage with mm-hmm. you in this way, because, then we just get into a big fight. That person might have less incentive to talk to you that way. You want to choose your response. So often people talk about, there are all these, people come to therapy and, my mother does this and my partner does this and my boss does this. And I said, well, what do you do? What do you do in response? So, we always say before diagnosing someone with depression, make sure they aren't surrounded by assholes. And so, yes, there are difficult people out there, but then do you need to be in relationship with this person? If you do, and there are things that you want, can you change your behavior so that it might influence they're reacting differently to you? Because whatever you're doing might be triggering them to act in a certain way too. And we often forget that piece of it.
It can be both. That you suffer from depression and you are surrounded by assholes and they influence each other.
Yes.
So you have this podcast called Dear Therapists. I think you receive a lot of great questions, maybe some which are not that great, but at least funny. What is the most important question you were asked, or the recurrent one, the most recurrent one? Because I suppose people are concerned about the main things, about their relationships, what you said, the relationship with their parents, one of the parents, usually the mother, the partner, the boss. So are there weird questions, but weird within the limits of a good psychological inquiry?
Yeah, we get thousands of submissions for the Dear Therapist podcast. And what we love is we're showing people what an actual therapy session sounds like, because we do a session with them. It's me and Guy Winch, and we are both therapists. And it's great to have two therapists on at the same time doing a session. And then we want people to see the effectiveness of it. So we give the person who comes on, homework, and they have a week to do it. And then they come back and let us know how it went. So people can see, it's not just that this happened during the session, but what happened after. That's so important, because we always like to say that insight is the booby prize of therapy, that you can have all the insight in the world, but if you don't make changes out in the world, the insight is useless. So we want them to make those changes out in the world. And the kinds of questions that were asked, I think are the, the questions of the human condition. And they probably, and by the way, you said it's mostly mothers. It's not mostly mothers. People have all kinds of issues with their fathers. We've done so many episodes of people with all kinds of parental issues. It's not gendered. But I think that, the question that it all boils down to is, how can I love and be loved? No matter what that means, no matter how different the problems look, and we've done however many episodes at this point. We're in season 3. We're just wrapping season 3 right now. And, we've done so many episodes. And I think if you listen to every episode, at the core, the question is, how can I love and be loved? No matter what they're writing in about.
Well, that's the main thing. So love moves the stars. Therefore, it's the gist of it in therapy as well. Well, we always say that, love can wound you, but it also can heal you. And so I think it's right about what does love look like? What was the love that you learned growing up? Maybe that wasn't actually love, because love shouldn't wound you. And the kind of nurturing love and how that can heal you. Well, so it is possible to learn love when you're not a child anymore. So there's hope for everyone.
But absolutely. Yes, that's what we do. So we help people with that.
You just need the right guidance. So that's why the title of your book is interesting from this point of view as well. Maybe, first of all, it's maybe, it's not you must. Maybe you should talk to someone, and that someone is not mentioned. Maybe you should talk to someone like a friend or a relative. And it's the important thing here, it is communication. So just reach out. So get out and try and solve your problem by stating it first. And while you name it, you just give it the sort of reality which will make it recognizable for a specialist, for a therapist, first of all, or maybe for a friend who could recommend you to a therapist and so on. So just communicate. And that's important as a message.
Yeah. And again, it was left vague in that way. Of course, the expression here is in the US is, maybe you should talk to someone. That implies a therapist. But, the main thing is we want to talk to each other. Yeah. We want to learn how to talk with each other. And I always say, choose your audience well, meaning it doesn't mean just talk to anyone. It means talk to somebody that you trust. And that makes all the difference. So, maybe the people that you've been going to when you've tried to open up before have not been the best audience for you. So choose your audience well when you decide who you're going to talk to. It might be a therapist, it might be a friend, it might be a family member, but choose your audience well.
What makes a good therapist? Just, I don't know.
Oh, wow.
Three things.
Yeah, so here's the thing. It really, what predicts success in your therapy is the relationship that you have with your therapist. Study after study shows that the relationship matters more than the therapist kind of training they had, the number of years of experience they have, the modality they're using. All of those matter. Don't get me wrong. They all matter quite a bit, but not as much as the relationship you have with your therapist. So I think what makes a good therapist is someone who really knows how to be human in that room with somebody else. I think that a lot of people, they go through their training, and I remember this when I was young and going through my training, we had this idea that we had to kind of be a therapist in the room. Whatever that meant, whatever our ideas of that meant. And really, I think what makes someone a really good therapist is how can you relate human to human in the room with this person? And if you can't do that, no matter how good you are at everything you learned in grad school and all your training, it doesn't matter if you're not able to connect in this way.
So that makes me think, what's the best way to create a relationship? And let's talk about love relationships, because this is the main issue of your patients. Let's call them patients, clients. What's the right name for them?
I wish I had a good name for them. I feel like neither patient nor client is really described, because you have such a unique relationship with these people. You have such an intimate relationship, and yet it's also a professional relationship. So it's very interesting.
So what makes a good relationship, a good love relationship? Of course, it's different for everyone, and each couple has their own semantics. You never know what keeps two people together and for how long, but still there must be some ingredients which are common to all the good relationships. If all the happy families are the same, as Tolstoy puts it, then maybe all the happy love relationships have some common things.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly think that they have, flexibility, emotional flexibility. So when there's a lot of rigidity in a person, it makes it very hard for them to function in a relationship, because you need that flexibility. Emotional stability. And what I mean by that is that you aren't projecting things from your past onto the person who's there in the present. And so often we do this outside of our awareness, where we have a very big reaction to something our partner did that might be a little bit annoying, but it wasn't that annoying, right? It didn't require this huge reaction. We always say that, if it's hysterical, it's historical. So if it's really intense, it's probably something, in addition to what's going on in the present, it's probably something from the past that's layered on top of that. If you haven't worked that out, it's going to be harder for you to have the kind of relationship that you and your partner want to have. So it's really important for you to work out whatever you need to work out, and own what is yours, as opposed to projecting it onto your partner. So I think self-awareness is really important. I think forgiveness and self-compassion and compassion for others and emotional generosity. Just really, really, understanding that people are human, and people have good moments and maybe not their finest moment. And how do we talk about that? And I think the most important ingredient for a healthy relationship is what we call rupture and repair. So when there's a rupture, somebody upsets somebody else, there's been some kind of rupture in the fabric of the connection. How do you repair it? Do you give the silent treatment because you're angry? No, that's not good. Do you retaliate and do something, unkind in return? What do you do? Or do you talk about it and you say, hey, I'm really sorry. Do you take responsibility? I'm really sorry. And can the other person in the repair accept the apology? How do you repair things? How do you create that so that when there is a rupture, it becomes not this earthquake in the relationship. It's like, oh, this happened and we understand and we've talked about it now and we understand each other now and we're moving forward.
But all the things you mentioned are quite big. So it takes a lot of effort, a lot of self-knowledge, of self-awareness to be able to master all these things for yourself and then in a relationship. So it takes ages. I suppose a couple after 40 years of living together can reach that state in which generosity and the mastering of all the emotions, the negative ones especially, is a daily thing. So, well, but the couples don't do that.
I don't think it takes ages. I think if it took ages, nobody would do it, because who wants to spend 40 years trying to do that? That takes too long. So I don't think it takes ages. And I don't think there's anything as like, you said negative emotions. I would just say all feelings are positive in the sense that they give us information. They're like a compass. They tell us what we need. So we have this tendency in our culture to label certain positive feelings and negative feelings. Like positive is joy and negative is, anger or sadness or anxiety. Anger and sadness and anxiety are great because they tell us something. What you do with it could be negative. If you have anger and then you scream at someone, that's not good. But if you take your anger and you say, what's underneath that? Was one of my boundaries violated? Am I not getting a need met? Underneath the anger, am I feeling sad? Am I feeling anxious? Am I feeling disconnected? Am I feeling lonely? What is it? That gives you a map to then ask for what you need or help you to find a way for yourself to get what you need. So it's really important that we welcome all of our feelings because they're a map to help us to get the kinds of things that we want in our lives.
Yeah, that's very good to know. But still, it takes a lot of effort. And I just have one last question. It's so interesting what you're saying, and it's so useful. And that's why I deeply recommend your book. Maybe we should all talk to someone, a professional or not. In the US, going to a therapist is something like the daily hygiene. It's like taking a shower. And I'm saying it with the utmost respect for the entire system, which allows you to express your feelings and not to have the stigma of this. But in Romania or in Eastern Europe, or I don't know, here, it's still something quite unusual. And among educated people, if you admit that you see a therapist, or if you say, oh, I'm not feeling well, or I just want to know myself better, or I am depressed, or I have an issue, and I need a therapist, immediately you are put into the category of there's something wrong with you. Maybe you're quite mad, or how do you address this? I mean, like, how can you convince people that it's beneficial, not only to them, but to the others as well, and to the society as a whole, to seek help, professional help, and that doesn't make you a nutcase?
Yeah, of course. Actually, I wish that it were kind of like accepted across the US. It's not. So I think it's easier here than it is for you, certainly. But we do still have that problem of stigma here. And I think that what's important about this is if you think about the way we treat our physical health, and the way we treat our emotional health, it's so different. But why should it be? So if you fall down and break your arm,
Indeed,
there's no sort of hierarchy of pain of, oh, well, I don't want to go get a cast for my arm and I'll just walk around unable to use my arm in an excruciating pain, because it's not as bad as, whatever it might be, a terminal illness, let's say, right? We don't make that comparison. If we're sick physically, we go and we get help. We go to the doctor. When something is not right emotionally, right? Like you're feeling sad or you're feeling anxious or you're having trouble in a relationship or whatever it might be, we tend to put it on this hierarchy. Like, well, it's not that bad because I have a roof over my head and food on the table, so I'll just tough it out. Yeah. Or I'm not crazy, so I don't need to go to, we have this idea that there's some idea of crazy if you go to a therapist. And, what happens is people don't come to a therapist until they're having the equivalent of an emotional heart attack when they should have come much earlier. So it wouldn't get that bad. And it breaks my heart because so many people have suffered for months or years before they will go and see someone And then it's gotten really bad when it didn't need to. So they've suffered unnecessarily for all of that time. And we only get one life and we don't get that time back. Mm-hmm. And so I think it's really important that people understand that the quality of our relationships dictates the quality of our lives, not just for us personally, but for the people around us, for our family, for our friends, for our partners, and for society at large, because we want a healthy society. Mm-hmm. So the healthy thing to do is to take care of our emotional health, just like the healthy thing to do is to take care of our physical health. Mm-hmm. And I think that when you look at it in those terms, it becomes much less stigmatized. Mm-hmm. It's just part of our health. We don't have to differentiate physical health, emotional health. They're intertwined. If your emotional health is not good, you will get physically ill. Mm-hmm. So
yeah, I said that was the last question. I lied. I'm so sorry. It's just one tiny question because I thought about it now. So emotions play the most important part in our lives. And this is a cycle which repeats itself and that affects our life for the short term and for the long term. If we are overwhelmed by, I don't know, shame, for instance, which is quite a recurrent emotion, or anger, as you said, what is one very small thing that we can all do just to try and annihilate that or just to push it away and feel better instantly, and not to feel better for the sake of feeling better, but for the sake of being in control of that emotion?
Mm-hmm. So the thing about shame is that it comes from a very self-critical place. And that's something that's learned. We aren't born that way. We aren't born feeling like something's wrong with us. Mm-hmm. And shame is something is wrong with me. Something is about me inherently wrong. And we aren't born that way. So that's something we learned along the way. And it's something we need to unlearn. I always say that part of getting to know yourself is to unknow yourself, to let go of these limiting stories that you've told yourself about yourself or that you've been told about yourself, so that you can live your life and not these stories that you've been told about your life. That's where shame comes from, those stories. So you want to unknow yourself, unknow those stories that aren't true. And I think that one of the things we can do is whenever I'm speaking in person and I'm on a stage, and I'll say to the people that I'm speaking to, show of hands, who is the person that you talk to most in the course of your life? Mm-hmm. Is it your partner? Lots of hands. Is it right? Is it, so but most people say, is it your parent? Is it your best friend? Is it your sibling? Tons of hands go up for those. The person we talk to most in the course of our lives is ourselves. And what we say to ourselves isn't always kind or true or useful. Mm-hmm. And so I had this client who was so self-critical, so bathed in shame. And I said, and she wasn't aware of it. And I said, look, I want you to go home and I want you to write down, listen for this voice in your head, the voice of shame. And I want you to write down everything this bully of a voice says to you, this self-critical voice, and come back next week and we'll talk about it. And she didn't believe me. She didn't really think that was going on. And she came back the next week and she could not believe what she would say to herself. Things like she was typing an email and she made a mistake and she said to herself, "You're so stupid." Now, you would never think if your friend was typing an email and they made that one letter was off, you would never say to your friend, "You're so stupid." You wouldn't even think that, right? She passed her reflection in a mirror and she said to herself, "You look terrible today." Mm-hmm. And she, of course, did not look terrible. So I think that, one of the things that people can do with shame is do the kindness test. Is it kind? Is it true? And is it useful? And if it doesn't pass that test, then change the radio station, take the shame station away, and listen to the kindness station. And the kindness station isn't fake. It's not like flattery. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. The kindness station is accurate. Mm-hmm. So it's not like, oh yeah, you're really smart, but you're stupid. No, it's like, yeah, you made a typo, but it's okay. You don't need to feel shame around it. Mm-hmm. So I would say the kindness test, keep that going all the time. Whenever you hear that voice of shame, say bye.
Well, so there's one last problem which remains, the problem of truth, because we never know exactly what is true and what is not, but at least the kindness can help us. So if beauty cannot save the world, if truth really cannot save the world, at least kindness might try.
And to ourselves, yes, and to ourselves.
Well, Thank you so much, Lori Gottlieb, for this lovely interview and for all the information you shared with us. And you can find more in Lori's books. And I hope you can come to Bucharest soon and talk to us in person and to your readers. Do you have a message for them?
Just thank you so much for following the book and the podcast and the TED Talk, and there's a workbook and all these different things. I so appreciate it, and I hope that it's helpful. That's why I do all of this, to bring therapy out of the therapy room and to make it accessible to everyone. And it moves me so much to know that wherever people are, that this is reaching them. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you. And see you soon. Bye-bye. Thank you.